4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Real people, real issues, real life. Talk Recovery Radio. Live from the heart of the downtown east side, it's Talk Recovery Radio with Giuseppe Ganci and Darren Gaylor on Vancouver's Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. From the streets to the studio, bringing you addiction recovery stories from real people with lived experience and real experts on today's issues. Tune in live every Thursday, noon to 1. Powered by New West Recovery. Real people, real issues, real life. Talk Recovery Radio.
And good afternoon, Vancouver. Hello, hello, hello. This is Giuseppe Ganci, and I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Darren Gaylor. Hey, Darren, how's it going?
Good, excellent. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. And yeah, we've been coming to you for 8 years, everybody. 8 years, hundreds of guests, thousands of listeners. Super excited about that. Thank you to everyone for all your support. And we're powered by New West Recovery, which is last door in Westminster House, Canada's recovery community. If you don't know, Jordan is our show coordinator. He puts together all of our guests, and we're starting to do personal stories again. So if you wrote a book, or if you're a person in recovery and you have a story of, coming out of addiction, email Jordan at lastdoor.org. It'd be great to have you on the show. And he's been doing a great job booking shows for us. And if you like what you're watching right now live on Facebook, you can go to talkrecoveryradio.com and replay all of our past shows. You can search for us in your favorite streaming device and listen to all of our old shows from iTunes to Spotify. And if you're on YouTube right now watching us, hit subscribe and catch our shows in the future with a notification. Darren, how's your week been?
It's been up and down.
Up and down.
I gotta say, just Grandpa's in the hospital. There's some sickness in amongst our families that here's what I've learned over the last week, and I mean, I think it's important as anybody like dealing with the onset of somebody's mortality, sickness, death, whatever that looks like, whether it's old age or, sudden OD, everybody's grieving. Like, you think, like, I don't know where I heard it, but it was just like everyone you see in the world, everyone is grieving in some form or another, whether it was 12 years ago or 2 days ago. That's something we all share as an experience, and it's kind of an amazing thing. I was really like taken aback because it's such a thing that feels like just me, like I'm the only one dealing with this, right? It kind of has an air of self-centeredness, right? Mm-hmm. My dad, my grandpa, and it humbled me a bit, like just hearing that. And I wanted to share that, like that everybody we see is grieving a loss in some way, shape, or form. And that's impactful. And it's like that part of life, eh? Like that we all have to share, and just being conscious of that. Like, I don't know, I think we can bring about some empathy and compassion, which is always the stance I think to take when we're struggling and trying to match our opinions, or
the stages of grief. I mean, especially in regards to our show, I don't even know how many people I know that have died from an overdose. Like, I don't even know anymore. I can't even count.
Yeah.
That's, sometimes I'm like doing that drive, you're in the car for half an hour and you just think about it and you start naming names, and then it's just like, you just stop counting because you're like, I don't even know where I'm at. It's an interesting a feeling. And I mean, this is our war now, you know. I can just imagine what it was like after World War I and World War II. And, you know, now we've got, you know, what's going on now, and just the death from substance use, from alcohol and drugs and nicotine. It's quite an stats and affairs. And we try to bring recovery to that. And we've had shows about grief and how do you recover from that? And what are the ways that we recover from that? And I'm glad that we get to put a positive spin where this too shall pass, and, you know, give it a day and give it another day. We had Kathy Wagner on the show just a couple of weeks ago, you know, talking about recovering from her son's overdose. I mean, it was just a young kid, and how she's turned that into not blaming and complaining and not just anger. I'm sure that's a little bit there still, but just how to overcome that and how to grieve through the holidays. That was a great show. You can catch that in some of our replays.
Yeah.
We always bring you awesome guests. I hope we always bring you awesome guests. You know, I think we do. Jordan does. And, you know, you're listening to us on Vancouver Co-op Radio, 100.5 FM. Shout out to them for giving us an hour time to talk recovery. And we get to talk recovery with some experts and then just people with lived experience. But today we've got an expert. Darren, who do we get to talk recovery with today? Super excited to bring on our next guest.
Yeah, we get to talk recovery with Dr. Stephanie Covington. Dr. Stephanie Covington is an internationally recognized clinician, author, organizational consultant, and lecturer. We like to call her a pioneer in the field of addiction and recovery. I mean, I just want to say you're a returning guest. I believe it was around 4 years ago. I don't know if I conveyed the honor at that time, but I'll do that now. I mean, I can't go beyond that as an intro without taking up the whole hour of the show. Yeah. 12 pages of what would be your professional resume of, you know, from when you acquired your PhD in psychology, all your teachings through the universities, consultations, publications. There's 18 books, I think, on your website, which all of this information can be found at stephaniecovington.com. So check that out. But again, I mean, you've been doing this a long time.
Long time. That's why there's so many pages.
Right, right. And that being said, I mean, whether it's addiction, psychology, mental health, I mean, you have your hand in the corrections area, trauma. All of these need updating and reviewing, and you know, things change so much. We've, you know, if we look back,
over the years, we've learned things. You know, I was consulting a few days ago with a treatment program in the Midwest, and I could tell. I finally had to say to the staff, you know, what you're telling me is what we did 20 years ago.
Right.
We've made some changes. We've learned some new things. I mean, some fundamentals exist, but we also have to get up to speed as treatment providers and people who are struggling with addiction. You know, we have more options today than we had 20, 30 years ago.
Now, best case scenario, you would think, you know, that would be the stance of every treatment institution, clinical worker, counselor, you know, please inform me, you know, the updated version. And it's almost describing like sometimes this is a personal, you know, like that I've been doing something wrong, but you yourself, I could imagine, you know, maybe not in that narrative that I had it wrong before. You had it as good as it was going to get based on the research of the time. I mean, your experience would be that of, you know, change and you know, do you find that resistance when you're consulting? And
well, sure. I mean, think about it. I mean, organizations are made up of people.
Yeah.
And human beings, most of us are not eager to change.
Right.
And it takes putting things aside. And in the recovery field, there's an added dimension. Still today, many people who work in addiction treatment are people in recovery. And there in the back of their mind is this belief, if I did it this way, this is the way you should do it. Versus, I did it this way, it worked for me, I can share that. But you might have to do it slightly differently. You might, and sometimes people have big egos and they really believe their way is the only way. So change has happened over the years. But I think, there's still places where people are kind of stuck. And one of the major places where they're stuck is around trauma. And addiction treatment programs historically had a mantra, and the mantra was this: when you've been clean and sober for a year, then you can, then you can work on your trauma issues.
Okay.
It was a great idea for the counseling staff because they didn't have to deal with the issue.
That's right.
It wasn't so great for people who needed treatment. So today we see many more people incorporating trauma work with addiction treatment, and that is as it should be, because so many people who are misusing alcohol and other drugs do have abuse and trauma in their history.
Right. I mean, fair enough. The client readiness is still a thing, right? I mean, it's not like every client at 30 days or 60 days, gets this intensive therapy. It's that readiness, that individual readiness.
Well, there's a readiness, but there's also what I believe every program should provide are three basic things for staff as well as their clients. And that is, it's not, deep, intense psychological treatment. What it really is knowing what trauma is, knowing what typical responses are, and what are some coping mechanisms. Because for many people, their coping mechanism has been alcohol or their drug of choice. And so it's really important for people to know there's a place to talk about it if they want to, that people know how to help, that there are resources, and there are things you can use to cope with difficult feelings that aren't about numbing yourself out with drugs.
In your opinion, I've had this conversation amongst many people, and based on my own experience as well, I sit in a treatment center next to someone that had no parents, or their parents were using, abuse, the typical story of why we're in a treatment center, why this person became an addict. That didn't happen to me. That never happened to me. So I'm confused why I'm there. But I guess my question is, does everybody have trauma, like to some, relativity of themselves? Is it everyone?
No, I don't think it's everyone. And I also think that, trauma is a big word and everybody's using it for every possible reason.
Sure.
A lot of people say being an addict is trauma. Well, for some people, yes, but not for everybody. I'm sorry, not for everybody. So, and what's trauma to you might be trauma that's different for someone else. But understanding it is important, because probably someone in your family or a good friend, or maybe one of your kids, or who knows, has had that kind of experience. So understanding it is something we all should know about and understand.
Yeah.
Over the years, I want to ask you about this scenario. So there's been 12-step treatment, is big. There's now harm reduction. There's models of care. There's microdosing. In Canada, microdosing has become very popular. It's now the next up and coming treatment industry. So there's this thing where we're, part of the show is put on by a treatment center. We're licensed and all that kind of stuff, and treatment's paid for here in Canada. So we don't have the insurance thing that goes on in the States, but we do have private treatment up here. Yeah, but we do have private treatment. So I was wondering, so you have all these models of care, and definitely you would know them all and what the research is behind them. There's this push that there's this treatment center and a patient walks in and every known treatment model should be available for this individual. And it sounds really good on paper. It sounds really good in a stakeholder group, but the reality is who's going to pay for it?
Not going to happen.
And yeah, and then, do you really want somebody microdosing in the same group with somebody who doesn't want microdose? So I'm just trying to figure out, why can't we just have a system where, hey, these are all your options. This is 12-step. Love it or hate it. This is SMART, love it or hate it. This is therapeutic community, love it or hate it. Like, why do we all have to, this is, an indigenous cultural program, love it or hate it. Do you have any idea why we can't just simply do that? Why do we have to have, like, you look at some treatment center brochures and it's like, oh my God, they do everything from yoga to mountain climbing.
Wait a minute. They say on the brochure, they do everything, and their website makes you think, but when you get there, what do you actually see? And I do think there should be truth in advertising.
Yeah, that's true too.
Because of all these things, people say and use language as to what they're offering, and they may or may not offer it, or it may be there if you could ever find it. So I think that there need to be some basic standards just of care and treatment. I do believe that. And then I do think it's fine. I think it's a good idea for different treatment programs to have specialties, we're known because we do X, Y, and Z. And if let's say I'm a woman, I've tried this program and it didn't work for me, and I'm going to go back to treatment, maybe I want to try this one because it offers something different that I did not get before. And I think if we had, in this case, you're right, and you do have some private treatment there, but you don't have the problems we have with insurance, which really drives our care in a whole variety of ways that personally I think it's unethical. I mean, insurance is a business. It is a profitable business. And people who run businesses look at the bottom line. So if I'm an insurance company, what do I want to do? I want to spend the least amount possible on you in order to improve my bottom line.
Yeah.
Is there anything wrong with this? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, lots wrong with it. Lots wrong with it.
Right. That and our pharmaceutical companies, it's the same issue.
So you're the author of many books, Woman's Way Through the 12 Steps. You also have written some books about men's recovery. Today's show, we want to do a focus on women's health. Okay. You're having an upcoming workshop, and Helping Women Recover is the title of the workshops. So why, I guess a couple questions here. Why do we need, I think I know the answer to this, but for our listeners, why do we need gender-specific recovery pathway conversations? I guess would be the first one. And then what is Helping Women Recover?
Sure. Well, yeah, my career has really been initially focused on providing services for women. And part of that, go back historically into, let's go back to the 60s where all treatment, if you look at social service systems, all addiction treatment was essentially designed by men for men. And mental health services were designed by men for women. And the criminal justice system was designed by men for men. Now you have women stepping into services that were never designed through the lens of a woman's life. So in the 70s, what actually happened is during the women's movement, the 60s and 70s, women came together in consciousness raising groups, and they started talking about the unmentionables. They talked about domestic violence. They talked about childhood sexual abuse. They talked about addiction to alcohol and other drugs. And so we got in the 70s, I think both in Canada and the US, our first domestic violence shelter. It's not that there was no domestic violence before that. Nobody talked about it. People today talk about childhood sexual abuse, not in the 70s. When I was in graduate school, first graduate school experience, social work, I was at Columbia, which is a good school, and here was my education on trauma. Incest occurs in less than 1% of American families, sentence one. Sentence two, the majority live in Appalachia. That was my sum total as a social worker, because nobody talked about it, right?
So that was the truth that,
nobody talked about it.
Yeah.
What did people know? They didn't know anything. So with the evolution of these new topics, by the 80s, and our federal government in the 70s funded 12 demonstration projects for women in addiction treatment. And that evolved into talking about being gender specific. What are the issues that need to be talked about? How should we be running groups? What is going to make a difference in terms of women's recovery? And so basically that's sort of where I came into the picture and said, yeah, not only we need to think about the environment, we need to think about the groups, the content. We need to rethink this. And so I started writing materials for women and women's treatment.
We had a guest on last week, whose sort of mantra was to recover out loud. And it just sort of dawned on me that, I mean, it really has been the courage and the, I don't know, the risk of the suffering or those that abuse to share the story, to begin talking about it, to, for us to sit here and have this conversation about evolving curriculum in the case of treatment, which is, I mean, yeah, anybody can sit and do a study and do research based on, what they see and come out with a conclusion and quantify it. But later on we think, well, that couldn't have been the case. There had to have been, more than that. What is your, I guess, stance then as a professional, as an educator, as, a psychologist? I mean, where do you find this? Where do you go to keep up with all of the information, and do you consider statistics and whatnot?
Sure, I consider them, but they're not my Bible.
Okay.
I listen to people. I mean, like you mentioned, I do a lot of work in the criminal justice system. Mm-hmm. And there's a researcher at UCLA that works a lot evaluating the programs I've developed. So yeah, I do believe in statistics because people like evidence something works. But how I do this is I listen to the people in there, the men and the women, and the transgender population, which is a really talk about, gender. We've always had a binary model in our minds, and I've just rewritten some of the materials to make it more inclusive for people, because we need to get out of the mindset that certainly I have from decades of work, male, female, but we need to expand that. So we have some 6-session trauma interventions, and originally it was called Healing Trauma for Women and Exploring Trauma for Men. And we approach the issues differently, even though the issues are trauma and abuse. And now it's Healing Trauma Plus. It's for women and gender diverse people. And it's Exploring Trauma Plus for men and gender diverse people, so that the language is different. The traumatic experiences that are in there that are talked about have to incorporate people's lived experience.
And it's explore and heal, because some people just, I had trauma, and the exploring piece is it men typically don't acknowledge their trauma? They have to explore it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well,
okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, I needed different titles. The workbook for exploring trauma is actually called Building Resilience, because when I talk to men, they don't want to walk around with a workbook that says trauma on it. Mm. Women will. It says Healing Trauma in their workbook. They don't have a problem with that. But the men, Building Resilience. Yeah, I'll walk around with that.
And I mean, this is psychology dating hundreds of years back.
Yeah.
That still exists within us. It's so interesting. Is it, since you're not someone that went through this yourself, well, I mean, addiction anyways, what was your drive? What caught you? Maybe you were just after your master's, or, and like, did something spark your interest?
Yeah, well, number one, I am in recovery.
Okay. Oh.
Okay.
Awesome.
Over 40 years, a long time.
Oh, congratulations.
A long time.
Yes.
So that sparked my curiosity.
Maybe not on day one.
Not on day one. No, not on day one at all. But there was a point. It's really probably at the time I had my degree in social work, but I actually felt too crazy to work with people. So I actually was an interior designer and an antique dealer living on the East Coast. That's what I was doing. And probably a month or two into recovery, I had this feeling, this sensation. I thought, I want one other woman to feel the way I do today. Mm. And it was that, you get the monkey off your back. And that feels really good. And I had no idea where that thought, that feeling would lead me. And it led me into a career, really. I had my social work degree, but I went back to school to get the PhD because I drank through my master's program and I wasn't sure how my brain worked. So I thought I should find out how functional I was. But I started going to addiction conferences. I was probably my second year of recovery and realizing they weren't talking about women at all. And I thought, well, that's not okay. So, I started talking about it and thinking about it and did volunteer work I couldn't get a job. I thought I'd get a job in an addiction treatment program, but here you had to have 3 years of recovery. I had a year plus and they wouldn't hire me, but they let me I could volunteer and I could run women's groups. So and that's how Helping Women Recover, the treatment program, came about. I started running women's groups and having a sense of what women were talking about and what they needed. And then I decided, I had clients, I had a private practice, and a lot of women didn't want to go to 12-step meetings because they were so male focused and the material was all he this and he that. And so I went to Hazelton and said, I think we need a 12-step book for women with women's stories and female pronouns. And actually,
and that was the best-selling recovery book, A Woman's Way Through the 12 Steps.
Exactly.
Excellent. Okay, so now you brought up earlier, sort of that bias that exists, with people, that how they got clean or how they changed their life. That's the method that works, which may have been an inspiration of the 12 Steps of books. But I mean, obviously, since, growth since then, in your career, but what is your stance still, like with the 12 steps? Is it still, men focused? Like what's?
Well, it depends. In metropolitan areas, particularly, there are women's meetings. So women can go to women only meetings. I happen to be a proponent of the 12 steps for a variety of reasons. Number one, it's a support. It's a support group, and I don't think people heal in isolation. I don't think they recover in isolation. I think we recover with support. For a lot of people, they don't have support. They don't have support from their family, their friends, or people who use. So there's support there. It's free. It's hard to find anything that's of any value that's free in our society.
With your experience, I'm sure you see Twitter, and this show, we've talked to so many different guests on this show, from ayahuasca treatment programs to SMART programs. But because we also support recovery, we sometimes get labeled as this abstinence only. Like it's almost like if you're in favor of 12 steps, then you're closed-minded. And why do you think that there's this clash? It's one of the only healthcare issues out there where literally it's like you're either for safe supply, or you're either 12-step, or you're either CBT, or you don't care, one of those three. There's so many silos, and it's almost become this hashtag for conferences, breaking down the silos. We even used it once for a conference that I worked on, and really it's almost like they build, like, I belong to some stakeholder groups, and it's like every meeting we have, it's like more bricks are added to the silo. We're not destroying them. So you have 40 years under your belt, all these books, you've talked to so many people. I mean, what is it? What? Like, I can't figure it out.
I don't know what it is. It's so territorial, as though somehow there's not enough to go around for everybody. I mean, yeah. One of the things I tell everybody, there'll always be enough addicts. Don't worry. There's no shortage. So I don't know what, it's a rigidity, I think. And I don't know if it's a rigidity that goes back to however somebody recovered themselves, therefore they hold on to it, or it's territorial. I don't know exactly, but I think it's really unfortunate. And there's also a lot of misunderstanding, which I also think it's like people have somewhat closed minds to opening up to other options. I mean, now today we can say harm reduction. 10 years ago in this country, if you talked about harm reduction and you didn't say that you could only have an absence-based model, I mean, you'd be skewered. Or how about medication-assisted treatment? Oh my God. There's still programs that are just, no, these are addicts, you can't give them medication. Well, what, it's really, it's a very closed-minded position.
It's interesting watching the pendulum, 10, 20 years ago, it was very common to hear people say, do the steps or die. And now in Canada, anyway, that pendulum's gone so far the other way. It's like, do harm reduction or die. And it's like, hey, can't we just find that gray area in the middle? In that, because, there's also the fear. I don't know about in the States, but in Canada, everything's paid for. So there's a fear up here where the pharmacology piece, where no matter, after 3 minutes of talking to a person with substance use disorder, it's like you're on medication for life or you will die.
That's not good.
And the fear is like, well, wait a minute, like, hold on a second, for life? They're 17 years old. So that's one thing that we try to have those conversations about. It's like, we still got to give people choices to make.
Absolutely.
in their healthcare. And we can't lose that piece. We can't lose that piece. And hopefully we don't. So people are watching, somebody may have a daughter who's having struggles. Do you have any quick hints, suggestions on what does one do to help their mom or their daughter, make some choices that will be healthier than maybe some of the choices they're making today?
Yeah, I think it's really, really difficult when you have a close family member, friend, someone you love, who is in the active throes of addiction. I think it's very painful to watch. And I think family members need to get help. Perhaps getting help for themselves about how to set some limits for themselves, because there's the getting too involved situation, and they also getting help in perhaps doing some form of intervention. And it isn't something that a family member can really do by themselves, because they're so flooded by feelings of both sadness and rage and all kinds of things. And so when you get to the bottom line, because, I don't know what your experience has been, but when you're in a familial or love relationship with somebody and they're addicted and you try to talk to them, usually you're going to be shut down. And usually anything you're going to say, you've already said before. And it hasn't gone anywhere, right? So I think if you've never said anything, I think it's important to say something versus hiding it, but also know it may not go anywhere. And that's when you need someone to help you have this conversation. And, interventions are very structured and can be very effective. So that I really recommend that as as a place to get help. But I think family members, and we're back to talking about 12 steps, but Al-Anon is a very helpful support group for people in relationships with addicts in terms of helping them to take care of themselves, because it's such a difficult and painful experience.
Yeah, that's always a question that comes with a difficult answer. I mean, from the most professional and educated to the most experienced. I mean, we always say, like, what should the families do? I mean, the family, I don't know what the percentage of cases, but are often those that have caused the trauma, created the anxiety, and they're the ones that need to make the phone call because their child is using, and almost like we're placating or ignoring the fact, what this child needs trauma counseling. And they're, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they may. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really difficult for families struggling alone, whether they've been a family that's has lots of problems and is a challenged family, or it's a family that's just done the best they can and their kid's in a difficult situation.
So I'm leading to a third party of some sort, right? I don't want to say interventionist or, consultant. Like, if you could designate or create, the perfect type of person to kind of come into that system, and not just simply to get that person into treatment, but to be able to talk to the parents, like, what does that person need? Like, what kind of qualifications?
Well, yeah, but see, well, you're asking a big question.
I know.
It depends on what the goal is here.
Right.
If the goal is that you have a family member who has an addiction problem and your conversation with them has gone nowhere and you feel you've tried everything, I think using someone who's been trained to do interventions is the appropriate person.
Right.
It isn't Aunt Mary, it isn't the next door neighbor. It's somebody who has a structured way of working that has shown to be effective. Right. Because this can get into a huge muddle.
Right.
If it's a family with lots of problems and you're dealing with a lot of various things, then you want someone who's a family therapist, someone who deals with families with a lot of challenges. But if we're talking just about addiction, a structured intervention can often be useful.
Yeah. And to have, someone like you describing that at least can be connected or doesn't have that biased, I'm an interventionist, you can't stay home, I got you a treatment center, so what's your choice?
No, that isn't how it should work.
Right, like a work with, does this kid need a withdrawal protocol right now? Can he stay home for a couple of days? Here's the 4 types of treatment that we can provide. We were talking about the topic of silos, and this is the way it is, and this is the only way I do. Do we need more of a, right there at the front line, approach of different networking opportunities at that point?
Maybe we have probably different ideas about what a good interventionist does.
Okay.
So to me,
I'm describing that.
So here's what I think. Let's say in my family, there's someone who's got a problem, and I've tried a variety of things. It doesn't work, and I realize I need help. So I speak to an interventionist who talks to me and says to me, okay, we need to get a few family members together, not just you. And then they talk to us about what the problems have been, and you begin to create a plan of how you're going to talk to the addict, as well as at the end of this structured conversation that's about what have you noticed, what have you seen, what does that mean to you, and how do you feel about it? It's very structured. Then you talk about what are the options. And, you know, the option might be inpatient treatment. The option may be intensive outpatient treatment. The option may be changing schools. I don't know. There are a bunch of options. And then each person in the family talks about what they're going to do to change in their behavior.
You know, on this topic, something that really fires me up about this, everybody listening and watching, you know, take this message, and if you're in Canada, go to your MP, go to your MLA. If you're in the States, they're different. You know, this piece is so important. If we really my opinion, tackle the overdose crisis, is we would have funded intervention like groups, because I've been to Portugal and I see what the Commission of Drug Dissuasion does in Portugal, and it's no one's attached, because intervention is sometimes, you know, depends on who you Google, you might get the, you know, they're tied to treatment centers, and they're connected, so it's hard to find an interventionist sometimes that's not tied to a program. It's very hard to find a neutral, I feel anyway, but if we, like in the Commission of Drug Dissuasion, not connected financially to any type of service, and recovery management, what is it? Like when a family calls us last door, they have a kid doing heroin in the basement. They don't know anything else other than crisis. And so they call us, right? And so if it could be different, it's like, don't call us, you know, call this, you call a health authority, and you just, you know, there's a service for the person that's using, but there isn't a service for the entire family. And I think that's one thing that's going to get us out of what I'd like to call an addiction crisis, where communities have recovery management, recovery education. So it's not just 12-step, and it's not just SMART, and, you know, you call it a SMART program. Yeah, it's about recovery, but, you know, we still don't have that. You know, hundreds of thousands of people have died since, you know, the fentanyl has started to hit the streets. You know, COVID, we responded pretty quickly with billions of dollars. We can't even come up with localized recovery management and recovery education awareness stuff, because, you know, really it's up to Google on who you find, and you know, and that's a really sad state of affairs, you know. And you know, Google did stop doing advertising for treatment, and everyone's like, oh, that's great. Well, no, it's worse, because now really rich treatment centers who know how to do, you know, SEO content become the #1 people on Google. So it's, I mean, that doesn't happen with cancer. It doesn't happen, you know, you break your arm, you go, you know, it's totally different. Right. And, you know, then, and I mean, breaking your arm, there's one method to fix it. Addiction, obviously there isn't. So what are some of the things people are going to learn at your workshops that are taking place in March? So it's called Helping Women Recover Workshops. March 1st to the 9th, there's different 4-day trainings. So help us understand, well, what am I going to learn if I go to this workshop?
Well, it's actually focused on the Helping Women Recover treatment program.
Okay.
And which I originally developed in '98, and then I revised it in 2008, and then revised it in 2019, because I believe things are changing and we should be evolving. I couldn't have something from all those years ago. No, I don't believe in that. And it focuses on 4 primary areas: self, relationships, sexuality, and spirituality. And they're interactive exercises and techniques and things we use with women in recovery in each of these 4 categories. And those 4 categories were chosen because when I wrote A Woman's Way Through the 12-Step book, and I interviewed women how they'd use the steps, I asked them 2 primary questions also. Besides each step, I asked them, what changed the most from your drinking and using days to recovery? And where were the triggers to relapse? And when I analyzed those interviews, there were 4 themes, and they were the same 4 themes in terms of what changed the most and where the triggers were. It was issues around self, issues around relationships, issues around sexuality, and issues around spirituality. So when I wrote Helping Women Recover, I wrote it with these 4 categories and ways of working with women on issues in each of those 4 categories. So what people will do in the workshop is they'll be going through the materials, and it's a virtual workshop, but they'll be moved into small groups, and they will do some of these exercises. They will do some of these experiential exercises. They'll hear about some of them, but they will practice doing some of them. And the Helping Women Recover also has a piece in there where women learn about trauma and what it is, and throughout they're learning various coping skills and grounding exercises. But also we talk about self-soothing. You know, what are the things you learn to soothe yourself once you take what you've been using out of the picture?
I mean, this is the type of workshop I think anybody in the field that's dealing with women, you know, it needs to do, right? Updates, you know, revisions of the information that they were previously taught. And also for a woman in recovery herself. I mean, that's obviously two different, you know, positions.
Right.
What do you find, you know, because it can't not be helpful for a woman in recovery learning about how to treat women in recovery, and what are the differences in perspectives though that you found working with women in this sense?
Well, you know, in this particular, if we look just primarily at this particular workshop, there will be women who will sign up who are doing it for themselves, and they will go through these exercises themselves.
Right.
The other people signing up will go through it, but they will be doing the exercises from their own personal perspective, even though they're going to be using it with clients.
Got it. Okay.
So I believe that no clinical person, no counselor should expect their client to do anything they haven't done themselves.
Well said.
So therefore, I want trainings to be interactive and experiential, so that I'm not just leading a group having you do this. I've never done it. That's not good clinical practice. So we do experiential learning. So whether you're signing up for yourself or you're signing up for your clients, you're still going to go through some of these various exercises. And we tell people if you feel, because it is a little awkward, you're in a virtual workshop breaking into small, you know, you can role play somebody else, but we have you think about why you're doing that. What is it about your life experience you don't want to be sharing? And when we have professional people doing that, we remind them that we expect our clients to do this all the time, to open up and share all kinds of things. And then when you're in a situation to share, you don't want to do it. And then we say the client's resistant.
Yeah.
How awful is that?
Right. You don't really want treatment. You really don't want recovery. But it's okay for me not to do it.
I remember going to a conference, and this doctor who's got some background, you know, that he's been around for a long time, and he sat up, and there was a room full of doctors, and he asked the audience, "How many of you have been to a 12-step meeting?" And hardly any raised their hand, and they're all addiction doctors. And he's like, "Well, you're doing a disservice to all your clients." And then he asked how many people went to a SMART meeting, and you know, how do you treat people when you don't even know or participate in any? It was an interesting thought. I mean, obviously the doctors are still, you know, ethical doctors, but it was just something to think about. It's like, so, you know, you don't even, like why haven't you, and all that kind of stuff. It's interesting. Wouldn't you want to learn and know what it's actually about, and so forth? So it's quite interesting that how few doctors in the room actually, you know, had, and it wasn't just doctors, there was counselors there too.
Oh,
so
sure. There's this kind of, there's the us and them.
Yeah.
There's those people out there, and I'm the professional here. And it really, I think in order to do good work with people, you have to understand all the things you're suggesting. You know, it's other people's lived experience. You know, in this case, you know, I knew something about addiction. I know a lot about trauma. It hasn't been part of my life experience, but it's something that I felt that I really needed to understand more. Or like, I've spent a lot of time and energy in the criminal justice system, and that's not part of my life experience, other than go in as a professional, but I've learned a lot. In fact, someone the other day said, do you think you've been in more women's prisons around the world than anybody else? I said, I don't know, but I've been in a lot around the world. And I've learned a lot from the women there. I've been in much fewer men's prisons, but I've certainly been in men's prisons. But
you know, it's what Darren and I have talked about this over the years. My attitude has definitely changed. When you talk to other individuals' lived experience, you know, we've had safe supply advocates on this show. And when you listen to them and talk to them and talk with them, you know, that everybody wants to help. Like really everybody wants to help. You know, 8 years ago, before we started this show, like I had my opinions because I was brand new in recovery, a bit of an ego. Yeah. And then when you actually talk to people and you're like, oh, you know, there are, you know, meditation programs that have nothing to do with the steps. You know, you would tell me that 8 years ago and I would have had a different opinion compared to now. And so it's nice to expand your knowledge. And like you say, we always need to expand our knowledge. We got a few minutes left. Let's have a quick chat about so women in prison and women going to private treatment, you know, the $30,000 a month program, you know, with, you know, 1 day a week shopping pass, you know, there's those. And then you have the women, you know, coming out of prison system. It's a totally different world. Both have, don't want to say failures. Both have people that relapse or return to use. Both have people that stay sober forever.
Yep.
So the you know, another one of those, you know, what's up, you know, questions, you know, do you have a comment towards why, you know, why, you know, how does that happen? And because some people are like, oh, if I only go to private treatment, I can't get clean here and all that kind of stuff. What, you know, we have this idea about recovery capital and people have resources that they build on. You know, what is it when it comes to the recidivism rates in women population?
You know, it is so individual, seriously, you know. And I think you've just spelled it out, two extremes. You know, inside a prison, women get some treatment and they get treatment coming out. If they get treatment coming out, it's publicly funded. There are not a lot of frills, to say the least, compared to, let's say, the program in Malibu, where, you know, they have private helicopters and all kinds of things. Those things, I think for people who are really affluent, they feel more comfortable in places that have their creature comforts. And I think that, so you're not pushing up against having them be more expansive in terms of the people around them and their environments. You're not fighting that in order to focus on addiction. But if you'll remember many, many years ago, when Mrs. Ford went to treatment, they put her in treatment at the Naval Hospital in Long Beach, which was not a frilly place. It was a military-run treatment program, and the wife of the President of the United States was in that program. She was not in a privately funded program, and she talked about that, and she thought it was important for her.
That was her decision, or
no? It was
somebody
not her decision. That there was an intervention done, and she went to what the federal government offered, essentially.
Wow. What a time to have been alive then, eh?
Think about it. But
but she saw the benefits of that.
She did, and she would talk about that. She would talk about that. There was a way for her to get out of her sort of White House mentality. Now, she's not a woman who grew up in a very affluent family, so she didn't grow up with a lot of pomp and stuff.
Right.
But certainly, being the first lady, she certainly had that around her in her adult life. But she thought that sort of stripping back and getting right to the basics was important for her. But I don't think that that's necessary for everybody. Because I think you take some people, and also let me sidebar, when they built the Betty Ford Center out here in the desert, they didn't build it as a replica of the Long Beach.
I was going to say that, yeah.
They didn't build a military style facility. So, but I don't think either of those things really are the essential item. I think the biggest issue when we're working with people and addiction is the issue, I believe in every addicted person, there's a place in them that longs to get the monkey off their back. They don't want to give up their drug of choice, but they want to get the monkey off their back.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
They want to get, and that's the place we have to touch. And we have to find that place, touch that place, and let them know it's possible.
Yeah.
You have to be the carrier of hope.
And hopefully them choosing themselves that the connection of behavior and drug abuse.
And be willing to take the risk to try what's being suggested.
Right.
And, sometimes I've said to women, one thing, it's possible. The second thing is, you could try it for 30 or 60 days and then go back if you don't like it.
Yeah.
You don't like how it feels, if you don't like the change. See what it's like. See what it's like to live without that thing that is driving you. So it's finding that place, but I believe that place exists in every person who's addicted. As much as they're in this love-hate relationship with their drug of choice, they love to get the monkey off their back.
I agree. And I think the best, most educated, counselors can find that and can direct that person. Because I would always ask that same question in my head that Giuseppe just posed, is it the amount of resources in the place that I'm at or the lack thereof that's determining, my long-term recovery, or, and it's an interesting concept. It's an interesting understanding. And I'm sure that Helping Women Recover workshop and that information that you're bringing into that is all about that, is all encompassing that wherever you are, whatever institution you're in,
Absolutely.
Whatever the modality is, that this is information that's absolutely necessary in our clients' needs,
Absolutely, because it's the relationship, it's that person who helps find that place and gives you a sense of the possibilities, of the hope and the possibilities. That's ultimately, I think, the key piece. And that can happen in a fancy place or not so fancy place.
Yeah.
And it will.
Yeah.
Recovery is possible. Recovery is attainable. And you're listening to Talk Recovery Radio. We're coming to you live every Thursday, noon to 1. And we're also on Facebook Live. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hit subscribe. We're with Dr. Covington, one of the international leaders in women's health when it comes to addiction, recovery, and trauma. Thank you for being on our show. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
There is the Helping Women Recover, a program for treating addiction. That's going to be having a workshop between March 1st and March 9th. It's 4-day trainings, and they're about 4 hours a day. You can go to her website, Stephanie Covington.com, and do some searching on there, and you'll find out how to register. You can also get CEs for the workshops, but there's also links to all of her many wonderful books that you can have a read. If you're a woman or a man, there's books for everyone. Awakening Your Sexuality. I think we need to have a show about that, Stephanie, if you don't mind. I want to see what that's about, because that's a really big deal when it comes to recovery that's not talked about a lot.
Big
is
taboo.
Sex.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable. I have a friend who had about a year clean, went back to use, came back. He had to come back because of the psychosis, a lot of drug, chemsex. And then now he's a big member of SA, and it's like he's just lit, he's just on fire all of a sudden, and he had to do that kind of on his own, and which I think is not great. It's like, why isn't that part of day 2 of treatment? So that's a whole other topic. I just wanted to bring it up so we can bring you back on the show.
Yeah,
okay?
We'll have Jordan contact you and rebook you.
Yeah. We need to do a show about that. So thank you for being on our show. And you know what? Your career's helped tens of thousands, if not more, hundreds of thousands of people. So we really want to thank you for that. And thanks for being on our show.
Well, thanks for doing your show and thanks for inviting me.
Excellent. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, everyone. See you next Thursday and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.